Welcome to the Deep Dive. We take piles of information, sift through it, and pull out those essential nuggets that help you really understand a topic. Today, we're plunging into something that, well, it affects all of us, but it can feel incredibly complex, maybe even a bit overwhelming. Disaster management. You shared a whole stack of sources with us. I mean, everything from the core concepts of how we handle catastrophes right into specific case studies and the really crucial role of modern tech. So our mission here is to cut through that complexity. We want to extract the most vital insights, giving you a solid but totally digestible understanding of how the world gets ready for, responds to, and then recovers from these massive challenges.
It's definitely a multifaceted field, and what's really striking in the sources is just how interconnected everything is, from the science behind prediction to the very human side of community resilience. Understanding all those different dimensions, well, it can genuinely empower communities and individuals too.
Okay, so let's unpack this then. The sources lay out this fundamental framework, basically boiling disaster management down to 4 key phases: mitigation, preparedness, response, and recovery. But for you, our listener who's already interested in this, the real deep dive starts when we look at how sometimes one of these phases gets, well, overlooked, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And that causes problems down the line. From your research, which phase do the sources suggest gets underestimated most often, and maybe why?
That's a really good question because while all 4 are vital, the sources consistently point to mitigation as the one that often gets less immediate attention. But paradoxically, it can have the biggest long-term impact. Mitigation is all about reducing the severity, the impact, before a disaster even happens. Think things like stricter building codes or early warning systems, maybe even environmental conservation. It's less dramatic than, say, a big rescue operation.
Right, less visible.
Exactly, but it often prevents the need for that rescue in the first place. Then you've got preparedness, that's the planning, organizing resources before an event, emergency plans, drills, that kind of thing. Third is response. Those are the immediate actions during and right after a disaster. Saving lives, meeting basic needs, medical care, search and rescue. And finally, there's a recovery. That's the long game. Rebuilding, restoring normalcy. It covers everything from fixing infrastructure to psychosocial support.
That's a key distinction, yeah, focusing on prevention, not just reaction. Okay, so with these phases in mind, what about the sheer range of disasters we're actually facing? The sources break them down into broad types.
Yes. Broadly speaking, they're split into natural disasters that includes your earthquakes, floods, hurricanes, pandemics, things like that. And then you have man-made disasters. This covers industrial accidents, nuclear incidents, big transportation accidents, or acts of terrorism.
And just to give you a clearer sense of those natural categories, the sources get even more specific.
Right. So, for instance, under geophysical, you've got earthquakes, that's tectonic plates moving, or volcanic eruptions with magma and ash. For hydrological, we're often talking floods, maybe from heavy rain or storm surges, and tsunamis, usually triggered by undersea earthquakes. Meteorological covers those big tropical storms, hurricanes, cyclones, typhoons, and also tornadoes, those intense rotating columns of air. Then there's climatological, like prolonged heat waves or cold waves. And importantly, biological disasters. These are the widespread infectious diseases, what we often call pandemics now.
As I went through the sources, what really stood out wasn't just the immediate event, the chaos. It was the ripple effects, the profound, sometimes really unexpected ways these disasters reshape things. Can you walk us through some of those maybe less obvious impacts?
That's a crucial point. The impacts go way beyond the initial human casualties, which are, of course, often the most devastating part. Natural hazards, for example, obviously cause immediate death and injury, and that can totally overwhelm local health care. But they also lead to huge displacement, migration. People lose their homes, their connections, and it strains resources wherever they end up. Economically, well, the damage to infrastructure, businesses shutting down, the sheer cost of recovery, it's immense. Environmentally, you see things like soil erosion, deforestation, serious hits to biodiversity. And then there's the infrastructure itself, transport, power, water. And we can't forget the psychosocial impact. Anxiety, depression, PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, it's widespread. And critically, disasters often hit vulnerable communities the hardest. They expose and, well, worsen existing inequalities.
That's a pretty sobering picture. Maybe we should dive a bit deeper into specific types, because the sources really show how different the consequences can be.
Definitely. Take biological disasters. You get these immediate public health crises, right? Healthcare systems get overwhelmed, hospitalizations surge, and often survivors face long-term health problems. The economic fallout can be huge. Businesses close, supply chains get disrupted, sometimes globally. Socially, you see fear, mistrust, isolation, sometimes even stigmatization. And yeah, there are environmental consequences too. Think about all the medical waste or the increased use of disinfectants. Now, for radioactive pollution, the sources used Chernobyl in 1986 as a really stark, definitive case study. It was just a catastrophic meltdown in Ukraine. It released huge amounts of radioactive stuff, iodine-131, cesium-137, strontium-90. The effect on ecosystems, immediate, severe. The famous red forest trees just died, turned reddish-brown. Wildlife populations dropped. Genetic abnormalities showed up. Human health impacts were awful. Acute radiation sickness killed people quickly. Long-term, increased cancers, especially thyroid, and even birth defects later on. And the economic and social fallout. Huge areas became uninhabitable. Thousands displaced, livelihoods gone, just an enormous economic burden. The sources also really emphasize industrial accidents. They're a grim reminder of why we need strong safety rules. The Bhopal Gas Tragedy in '84, that toxic methyl isocyanate, MIC, gas leak from Union Carbide, sources estimate something like 15,000 deaths plus widespread long-term health issues, contaminated soil, water.
Horrifying.
Yeah, it's described as just this haunting example of corporate negligence, lack of oversight, and more recently, the Vishakhapatnam gas leak in 2020. Styrene gas from an LG Polymers plant. It caused deaths, widespread panic, and it really brought those concerns about safety protocols. Are they being followed right back to the surface?
It's clear the impacts are just profound and they last. So the key takeaway here for you is really appreciating why all this effort on preparedness and mitigation is so incredibly vital. Okay, let's shift gears now. Let's talk about the proactive side. What are some of the big strategies societies use to build resilience, to try and lessen these awful effects?
Well, there's a whole range of mitigation strategies. Early warning systems, EWS, are key. Using advanced tech sensors, monitors to give timely alerts. That buys precious time. Infrastructure resilience is another big one. Building and strengthening buildings, bridges, roads so they can actually withstand specific hazards like earthquakes or floods.
Makes sense.
Then there's land use planning, basically zoning rules and building codes to stop construction in really high-risk spots like floodplains. It's a quiet kind of prevention, but effective. Community education and training is crucial, too. Awareness campaigns, drills, just giving people the knowledge and skills they need. Afforestation and environmental conservation, planting trees, maintaining ecosystems that helps prevent soil erosion, can buffer against floods or landslides. We also see insurance mechanisms. Things like disaster risk insurance give financial support, help speed up recovery. International collaboration is important for sharing information, resources, coordinating responses across borders. And of course, technological innovations. Drones, AI, satellite imagery, they allow for much faster damage assessment, better prediction.
It's interesting how preparedness kind of touches your daily life, even if you don't always think about it that way. What are some concrete steps for, individuals and for the infrastructure itself?
Absolutely. For people, preparedness means things like education, knowing evacuation routes, emergency contacts, basic first aid. It means doing drills, having emergency kits ready, water, food, meds, important documents, and having a family communication plan. For infrastructure, it means things like enforcing strong building codes, making sure critical places like hospitals have backup plans, building resilient utility services, power, water, and all of this is supported by good early warning systems.
It's easy to picture disaster management as this big top-down government thing, but the sources kept highlighting community involvement. That seems to be where the rubber really meets the road. Can you explain that a bit?
Oh, completely. Community-based disaster preparedness, or CBDP, is absolutely vital. It uses local knowledge, local resources. It starts with understanding the specific risks in that place, what hazards are likely, what's the community's capacity to cope. Then it's about building that capacity, training people in first aid, search and rescue, setting up local early warning systems, maybe sirens, text alerts, community networks, developing clear evacuation plans, routes, shelters, how to communicate and practicing them through drills, and crucially, building partnerships between the community, local authorities, NGOs. It creates this collaborative safety net.
Can you give us maybe some contrasting examples, from the sources showing how preparedness, or maybe the lack of it, really played out?
Sure. The sources often point to Hurricane Katrina in 2005. It's used as a sobering example of how inadequate preparedness, the levee failures, issues with evacuation plans in New Orleans led to just catastrophic flooding and consequences.
You remember that clearly.
In stark contrast, you look at Japan's response to the 2011 Tohoku earthquake and tsunami. Despite the incredible power of that event, Japan's strong building codes, their highly effective early warning systems, and the regular drills the public participates in, while they significantly reduce the number of casualties, that contrast really hammers home the tangible difference that good preparedness makes.
Okay, let's pivot slightly now. Let's talk about the medical and psychological side of things. These aspects are so crucial, often overlooked maybe, but the impact is huge. What do the sources say about the immediate healthcare response and also those unseen wounds?
They're absolutely critical, often the difference between life and death, or between short-term survival and long-term well-being. Disaster medical management, DMM is the term. It's about organizing, coordinating, delivering medical care during and after disasters. In the preparedness phase, that means training healthcare workers, setting up communication systems, developing emergency plans. For example, hospitals in earthquake zones practice mass casualty drills. During the response, you see things like mobile medical units, field hospitals being set up quickly, especially after floods or hurricanes, to provide that urgent care. Recovery then focuses on restoring, sometimes enhancing, healthcare systems, like strengthening public health surveillance after a pandemic. And for mitigation, it's about weaving medical considerations into the bigger picture, like ensuring hospitals themselves are built to withstand earthquakes. A really core concept within DMM, especially when you have mass casualties, is medical triage.
Right, triage.
It's a systematic way to prioritize who gets care, based on how severe their condition is and what resources are actually available. Patients get categorized. Immediate care, red. These are critical cases, need attention right now, severe trauma, cardiac arrest. Urgent care, yellow. Serious, but not immediately life-threatening, maybe fractures, moderate breathing problems. Delayed care, green. These are non-urgent cases, minor injuries, stable chronic conditions. They can wait a bit. And then unfortunately, in really resource-strapped situations, there's expectant black. These are patients with such severe injuries, their chance of survival is minimal. It allows resources to focus on those who can be saved. It's a grim reality, but necessary in those moments.
It's a stark process, definitely.
Hey.
Okay, what about those unseen wounds you mentioned? The psychological toll can be just as devastating, maybe even more so in the long run.
Absolutely. The psychological impact is profound, it lasts, and the sources really stress how often it's neglected. That's where psychological rehabilitation and disaster management comes in. First, you have to understand the impact. People's normal lives are shattered. There's fear, grief, trauma, anxiety, depression, PTSD. Mental health professionals need to assess these needs. Then comes immediate intervention. Crisis support, psychological first aid, emotional support, creating safe spaces for people. Community-based approaches are really important too. Group therapy, support networks, activities that help rebuild those social connections. For long-term resilience, you need sustainable support systems, ongoing mental health services integrated into community development. And finally, public awareness and education are key. Reducing stigma around mental health, letting people know where they can get help.
And this ties into the broader public health response too, right? Beyond just immediate medical treatment, what's involved in protecting the health of the whole population?
Exactly. The public health response is vital for everyone's well-being. It includes assessing immediate health needs and intervening quickly, deploying medical teams, setting up field hospitals, getting essential supplies out. It's crucial for disease surveillance and prevention, tracking outbreaks, running vaccination campaigns, ensuring access to clean water and sanitation, providing health education. Psychosocial support and mental health services are a core part of this broader response as well. And looking longer term, it's about recovery and building resilience, rebuilding healthcare infrastructure, strengthening public health systems overall. The sources specifically call out immunization during pandemics as a critical public health strategy, emphasizing timely, widespread vaccination, fair global distribution, and international cooperation.
And then there are those basic fundamental environmental health issues that always seem to crop up after disasters.
Oh, inevitably. Disasters wreak havoc on environmental health, hygiene, and sanitation. You often get significant environmental degradation. Water sources get contaminated, leading to diseases like cholera, dysentery. Air quality can suffer. Hazardous substances might be released. Waste management just breaks down. Hygiene becomes a massive challenge. Lack of clean water, lack of facilities, the risk of communicable diseases spreading in shelters is really high. And sanitary issues are rampant. Infrastructure gets damaged. You might see open defecation, problems disposing of waste, all of which just multiplies the health risks. It's a major focus for response and recovery efforts.
You know, if there was one area digging into these sources that really made me think, wow, things have changed, it was technology. It seemed to dramatically boost our ability to manage disasters compared to even, say, 20 years ago.
That's a great observation. Technology has absolutely revolutionized disaster management. It's fundamentally changed what's possible. Take geographic information systems, GIS. They're incredibly powerful. For early warning and preparedness, you can create these detailed maps showing vulnerable populations, infrastructure, land features. You can monitor weather, seismic activity, flood data in real time for better predictions. For response, GIS lets you visualize the affected areas, assess damage quickly, identify usable routes, prioritize where resources go, plan evacuations much more effectively.
So it gives you that big picture view.
Exactly. And post-disaster, it helps create damage maps and plan reconstruction, figuring out land use patterns, infrastructure needs. For risk reduction, you can analyze historical data to inform zoning and planning. Space technology is another massive game changer. Satellites with advanced sensors are vital for early warnings, hurricanes, earthquakes, wildfires. Remote sensing gives us real-time satellite images to assess damage, pinpoint critical areas. Satellite communication provides that essential link, keeping people connected even when ground systems are down.
Crucial in remote areas, I imagine.
Absolutely. And GNSS systems, like GPS, provide precise location data for search and rescue teams. Post-disaster, satellite imagery helps with damage assessment and planning for rebuilding cities and infrastructure. More generally, information technology, IT, is like this huge umbrella covering many tools. It supports early warning, GIS, and especially communication and coordination. Think mobile apps, social media platforms, emergency alert systems, cloud-based tools for collaboration. IT also enables better data management and analytics for prediction and facilitates things like remote sensing with drones. And when you look specifically at modern technologies for emergency communication, there's a whole suite of tools. Mobile alerts and apps give real-time location-specific notifications. Social media integration is huge now for real-time updates, safety info, getting information out fast, but also receiving information from affected people.
A two-way street.
Precisely. The Internet of Things, IoT, uses sensors to monitor environmental conditions, giving better situational awareness. Satellite communication, as we said, keeps remote areas connected. Artificial intelligence, AI, is increasingly used for predictive analysis, identifying potential emergencies, optimizing resource allocation, even powering chatbots for immediate support. And drones are invaluable. Surveillance, damage assessment, search and rescue support, even acting as temporary communication relays when networks are down. They can go places people can't, safely.
It's really clear these aren't just fancy gadgets. They're becoming essential lifelines. They dramatically improve our ability to save lives and rebuild. So, with all this tech, what does it mean for the human side? The coordination. Who are the key players pulling all this together?
Well, effective disaster management is absolutely a team effort. It needs complex coordination between many players. Government agencies are central, of course. Both national level, like the NDMA, the National Disaster Management Authority in India, setting policies, coordinating resources, and local level agencies, implementing plans, running drills, managing resources on the ground. Non-governmental organizations, NGOs, like humanitarian groups, play a huge role. They provide immediate relief, help with long-term recovery, medical aid, shelter, food. They're often very flexible and good at community-based risk reduction. United Nations, UN agencies like UNDRR, the UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, or UNDP, the Development Program, offer technical expertise and coordinate international aid efforts. The Red Cross and Red Crescent societies are major players globally in response and recovery, medical care, shelter, community work. The IFRC, the International Federation, coordinates the national societies. The private sector also contributes, often with financial support, mobilizing resources, or providing critical infrastructure and services. And we can't forget community-based organizations, CBOs. They're right there on the front lines. They have invaluable local knowledge. They help organize preparedness and facilitate communication within the community.
And then you have the uniformed services, often the first ones physically on the scene, with very specific capabilities.
Exactly. The Armed Forces, Army, Navy, Air Force can deploy rapidly. They provide critical search and rescue, medical aid, huge logistical support with helicopters, transport planes. They also help maintain order and secure vital infrastructure. The police are essential for public safety, managing evacuations, controlling traffic and crowds. They're often among the very first responders and help make sure humanitarian aid can get through. And paramilitary forces, like India's NDRF, the National Disaster Response Force, are highly specialized. Trained specifically for disaster response, search and rescue, medical aid, dealing with hazardous materials. They work very closely with civilian authorities.
Why this insight is so important for you is recognizing that there's this vast interconnected network, from global organizations right down to your local community groups, all working ideally together to keep people safe. Okay, let's shift focus one last time to a more analytical view, something that helps us understand why some places get hit so much harder than others. Let's talk about risk and vulnerability. Why are these concepts so fundamental?
They really are foundational, yeah. And sometimes misunderstood. Risk isn't just the hazard itself, it's the probability of that hazardous event happening, plus its potential consequences. Its likelihood combined with impact. Risk includes exposure, what's actually in harm's way, like people or buildings, susceptibility, how easily something is affected, and resilience, the ability to absorb the shock, adapt, and recover. Vulnerability, on the other hand, is about the inherent weaknesses within a system or community that make it susceptible to harm in the first place. This covers social factors, economic conditions, environmental factors, institutional weaknesses. The really crucial insight here is that the hazards say an earthquake of a certain magnitude might be the same in two different places, but the impact can be wildly different because of the underlying vulnerability of those communities.
That makes perfect sense.
Oh.
Can you maybe give an example from the sources where, I don't know, maybe a subtle misunderstanding of risk or vulnerability led to a surprising outcome? Something counterintuitive, perhaps.
That's a good challenge. Okay, think about geological hazards, like earthquakes again. Risk assessment involves identifying the hazard, analyzing how vulnerable buildings are, mapping who or what is exposed, and then trying to quantify the risk. Vulnerability assessment digs deeper physical things like building integrity, socioeconomic factors like income or education access, environmental impacts, institutional factors like how good the emergency plans are. A surprising insight sometimes is how a building that looks seismically sound might actually fail because of unforeseen soil liquefaction underneath it during a quake, a vulnerability in the ground, not the structure itself that wasn't fully accounted for.
Ah, okay, so it's not just the obvious factors.
Exactly. Or take hydrological hazards, like floods. Risk assessment maps the different flood types, uses historical data, climate projections, figures out what assets are exposed, quantifies the potential impacts. Vulnerability assessment looks at infrastructure resilience, land use choices, socioeconomic conditions like poverty, ecological resilience. What's sometimes overlooked is how something happening far upstream, like massive deforestation, can drastically increase flood vulnerability miles downstream, even if local rainfall hasn't changed. The vulnerability shifted because of actions elsewhere. And with epidemics like COVID-19, risk is clearly higher with dense populations, urbanization, global travel. Vulnerability factors include things like weak healthcare systems, socioeconomic gaps leading to unequal impacts, and significantly misinformation. The sources really highlight that sometimes a key vulnerability isn't just the virus, but the infodemic, the flood of false information that goes with it, actively undermining public health efforts. That can be a surprisingly potent vulnerability.
So the real practical takeaway here for you is that understanding your specific risks and vulnerabilities, looking beyond just the obvious hazard, is absolutely the first step to effective preparedness, personally and for your whole community. All right, let's wrap up with what might be the most powerful and certainly most accessible tool in the entire disaster management toolbox: education and awareness.
It's absolutely paramount because knowledge genuinely empowers people. Education in this context means awareness and preparedness. Giving people knowledge about their local risks, what triggers disasters, what the consequences are, what the emergency procedures are, how to make a disaster kit. It fosters community engagement and communication. When people understand the risks, they're more likely to participate in planning, take responsibility, and help share critical information effectively. Education also helps with the skill development, training people in things like first aid or basic search and rescue. It builds psychological resilience by helping people understand what happens after a disaster and learn coping strategies. And, importantly, it empowers citizens for policy advocacy and decision-making. Informed people can push for better policies and participate meaningfully in shaping their community's approach to safety.
So what this really boils down to for you is, the more you know, the safer and more resilient you and your community can ultimately be. But we've certainly covered a lot of ground today, haven't we? From rethinking those core phases of disaster management to really understanding the deep human and environmental impacts, then diving into mitigation and preparedness strategies. We explored the vital roles of health and psychology, saw how technology is transforming our capabilities, and learned about the huge collective effort involving so many organizations, from global to local. And finally, we dug into the nuances of risk and vulnerability and landed on the power of education.
It's definitely clear that disaster management is incredibly dynamic, it's multidisciplinary, and it's constantly evolving. Its sheer complexity just underscores how vital collaboration, ongoing learning, and adapting to new challenges really are.
We genuinely hope this deep dive has given you more than just facts. We hope it's provided a framework, a way of thinking that leaves you feeling more informed and maybe a bit more empowered as you navigate, well, a world where uncertainty often feels like the main constant.
And maybe a final thought to leave you with. In a world where uncertainty is such a constant, perhaps the truest measure of a society isn't whether it can completely avoid disaster, but rather how quickly, how effectively, and how compassionately it manages to rebuild itself, both physically and psychologically, after the storm inevitably passes.